Awesome. So I start recording. Welcome everyone. My name is Vanessa Araujo. I'll be hosting today's event. Thank you so much for joining because I know it's lunchtime and Portuguese love lunchtime, and food, so it's a bit challenging on that front. But I'm super happy to have you here today. And with me, as you see on the screen, I have Hannah that kindly accepted to join us. Hannah is an AI governance specialist in Siemens Energy, where she really advises on development of internal structures and processes, and that enable that responsible and compliant AI. And she kindly accepted to join us and to talk a bit about their journey. How are they adapting to this new world of AI, but at the same time data governance, how they are keeping innovating and going fast, but not compromising when it comes to privacy requirements and compliance. We want these sessions to be interactive, and there will be at the end lots of opportunities, not only for ask questions, but also to share your own experience. We are always trying to your content, and then at the end we'll open for more discussions. But in the meanwhile, if there is topics that you share your insights, or if you have questions, I ask you to write it to Hannah as appropriate as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vanessa, for the introduction. I'm going to start sharing my screen now then. Let me know if you can see my screen. Great. Awesome. So yeah, before we start, I just want to say a few words. So yeah, as Vanessa mentioned, I work for Siemens Energy, and I've been doing this work for the past 4 years for Siemens Energy. I've been working on AI governance for the past 3 years now, and my background is law, so I'm initially a litigation lawyer. So I think it brings a different perspective to things. And I want to start by asking a question that is being asked in organization is, what do we do to make innovation sustainable? Because of course, doing AI governance is making sure that you rescale AI in the company, but to do it in a responsible, compliant, and resilient way in order to make innovation sustainable, because it's easy to have innovation. What is hard is to make it last. And scaling AI is, in my opinion, not the most challenging part today. If you have the tool accessible, you have use cases, and if you have good data governance practices, of course, you are able to deploy AI system at a pace that was unimaginable 5 years ago. And I found this survey quite interesting that was conducted by EY last year over 1,000 C-suite leaders, where those leaders admitted that 70% of them have integrated and scaled AI in their organization, whereas only 1/3 of those organizations have proper governance controls in place. And this really shows that, yeah, most organizations are investing heavily in AI capabilities today, but far fewer of them are investing equivalently in AI governance. And the gap between the two is really not just a compliance risk, but it is a trust, reputational, and business risk as well. We understand there is a pressure to move fast. I see it every day. But it's clear that the tech is moving faster than the framework can right now. I see organizations deploying AI system before the governance around the systems is in place. And this is a problem, because before we scale any AI system, we should be asking ourselves, do we have all the knowledge that we need to have to understand how the AI is making the decision that it makes? Who is accountable when something goes wrong? Can we explain the decision that the AI system is making? Are the right human oversight mechanism in place? And those questions, they have to be addressed before we add users, before we expand the use cases, before we deploy new use cases. Otherwise, AI won't be scaled responsibly in our organizations. Answering these questions require also something technology deployment alone cannot deliver, and this is a cultural shift towards accountability. AI governance requires accountability for the decision and also recommendation that the AI system is making, and a willingness to interrogate and sometimes constrain systems that deliver business value. And that's where we can butt heads with people from the business. They need to understand that to be efficient and to bring real value, both data governance and AI governance require the organization to move from treating data and AI as a purely technical concern owned by IT towards shared responsibility in the organization across the whole business. Because both data governance and AI governance demand a shift from reactive compliance to proactive stewardship. And they both also require trust. We need to trust the quality of the information, and we also need to trust the system making the decision or the recommendation using this information. The cultural shift AI governance requires cannot wait for regulation to force it. The organization that understand that will not just be compliant, they will be trusted. And in a world where AI is making consequential decisions in an increasingly, I think trust is the real competitive advantage. Of course, I'm a lawyer by training. Landscape today that is shaping AI and data governance in Europe. I just want to highlight, it is true that the legislation is always catching up with technology, as I was saying. Framework don't move as fast as technology. That prevents to take a lot of time to implement those regulations, and sometimes they are being caught up by those regulations. So I would advise of the talk of a lot of conferences. If you haven't started implementation, I'm going to do it. It's at the intersection of critical and regulated, and is also really concerned by AI acts. We have operational data, where data act is coming into play, and obviously we are one of the actors accelerating the AI adoption. The regulation I will walk you through quickly because I don't want to bore you with it, but I still think it's quite important to understand why, how data governance and AI are becoming so relevant today. And the first one is the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, that came into force in 2018. So with the GDPR, we noticed a shift from the European Commission and the EU as a whole, because we are going away from directives. So directives are also a regulation that are coming from the EU, but they are not directly applicable. They require some text to be applicable in national laws to regulation, and regulation are directly applicable. And with the GDPR, it's the first time that organizations had to answer simple questions that they didn't have to answer before, which were, do we know what personal data we have, where they are being used, and who can access it? Because of the GDPR, data governance that was for a long time seen as a back office concern became very relevant. Everybody took an interest in data, because I have to admit, I think it's also due to the fines that the GDPR, for the first time, I remember very clearly organizations panicking, thinking, oh my God, now the fines, if we don't comply, are up to 20 million or 4% of the global annual turnover for serious violation. We need to have compliance, and we need to make sure that we comply with this new regulation. And because of it, organizations started to build data inventories, classification framework, access controls. And I believe that, in a way, GDPR gave real teeth to data governance. And I also think data governance became urgent in organization because digitalization at scale made it operationally necessary for them. In 2024, as we all know, there was the EU AI Act coming into play, and the EU AI Act is really the regulation that aims at regulating AI systems put on the market, used or deployed in the EU. It has waves of application. The last one is supposed to come this summer in August for high-risk AI system, but I won't get into too much details right now. What is really important to know about the AI Act is that it's a risk-based regulation. So it means it is classifying AI system based on the risk, and it gives obligation for different category of risk. The most obligation you will find in the AI Act are for high-risk AI systems. And in the energy sector, as I was saying, we are concerned by those high-risk AI systems. And yeah, so in the AI Act, we also have a lot of ethical principles. There were ethical principles, and with the AI Act, there are becoming regulation, such as transparency, accountability, human oversight. And we also have some obligation when it comes to data governance, which make the data pipeline a compliance artifact, which was not the case before. And this is specifically for high-risk AI system. I want to be super clear, because if we look at the AI Act, most AI systems are not really regulated. You don't have lots of obligation. But for high-risk AI system, which I would say constitute maybe 2-3% of all the AI system we find in the ecosystem, you have a lot of obligation you have to comply with. And I was really happy to see that the AI Act was speaking about data governance, because what I've learned during this journey of working in privacy and in litigation and also in AI governance is that good AI governance is not really working without good data governance. They are not the same thing, but one heavily depends on the other. And I feel like not every organization has understood that yet. And most organizations took years before understanding and giving data governance the proper means and attention it deserved. I feel like AI has accelerated this a little bit, because we all understand now that garbage in, garbage out. So if you don't have good data quality, you can't have good output, which forced organizations to really focus on their data and by consequences on data governance practices. This is also reflected in the ISO 42001 certification. So this is the certification for AI management systems. And in this certification, to be able to obtain it for your organization, you need to put in place data governance policies. And I guess I don't have to convince this audience that data governance is important. Yeah, go ahead.
There is a question from Pedro that I think is topical on this specific slide. When he's asking that, we know that from a European perspective, there is these different acts and there is a push in terms of the responsible AI adoption at the same time as innovation. It was curious to see your perspective. Do you feel that this is pushing us to really adopt it in a responsible AI manner, or do you think that we have a risk here from an European perspective to create a bigger gap in comparison with other countries, being the US or China, because we do need to comply with these acts while they have a bit more freedom, let's say, in that sense?
Yeah, so two things. I think first, the digital omnibus package that I was going to touch on at the end this is the aim of this package, is basically to simplify the regulation and maybe help organizations to have less administrative burden. So I guess there is also an initiative from the EU to simplify things, because they don't want to lose competitiveness as well. But I do really believe that at least the AI Act had really bad press for being super restrictive. That narrative, from my pure legal perspective, is really wrong. I think it's just oversold. When you really look into the provision, as I was saying, only 2 to 3% of the AI systems that you see in the ecosystem, when I say ecosystem, I'm not saying from the energy, I'm saying in general, when you look at all the AI system, very limited ones are high risk. And in the AI Act, you have options. I don't want to be super legal about this, but you have an article that is dedicated to exception to get you out of the high risk category for certain of them. So it's very limited. That's what I want to say. The scope is very limited for those obligations. It's true that once you do fall under this category, you have a lot of obligation. But I do believe when you read the text and you see which AI systems are considered as high risk, I'm going to take one example, which will be speaking to everyone, it's HR systems. So when there's an HR system making a decision to select a candidate, for example, or when there's an AI system used in your to evaluate performance to make decisions about your career, I believe this is really good that we have all those obligations around the systems to make sure that the data is of quality, that you are keeping the logs. I mean, there's so many of them, that you have meaningful human oversight. All of this for me really makes sense. And I think, at least from what I've seen and what is happening in the US, I'm not jealous of what is happening in the US. I think we do have a more strict approach when it comes to new technology in the EU. But in the end, if you look at what happened with the GDPR, a lot of countries ended up adopting very similar laws that we already had in Europe when it comes to protecting data. So I believe this is the right approach because competitiveness is important, but we don't want to just innovate for the sake of innovating. And what happens sometimes I've seen in the US, they are very reactive. So something happens and then they do a law. Something happens, like an accident happens. We've seen that with AI, by the way. Lots of people committed suicide because they had, well, lots, I think more than one is already too much, because they had conversation with AI systems, with chatbots that were basically not appropriate, and they committed suicide based on those interactions. If the US had protective laws for teenagers, for example, saying that you can't interact with a chatbot unless you have like you're 15 or you have X and like I don't know, some protective laws at least, maybe we could have prevented these things from happening. So I think it really depends of what is your vision of ethical development and deployment and what you think is most important. I believe that I really like living in a place where we are trying to protect people and safeguard fundamental rights and not innovate for innovating. But I think it's also because I'm European, so I have a very European vision of things. I live in the US, so I also did see, at least from this perspective, and also their perspective, how they're doing things. I don't envy them. And I really like the fact that we have those laws in place, and we're still aware that we want to keep our competitiveness, and that's why we have those initiatives like the Digital Omnibus Package. So it depends on which world you want to live in, really. Do you want to live in a world where progress is more important than human lives? And that is a choice, I guess. Personally, I'm happy to be where we are, and I'm happy those regulations exist. But this is my personal opinion.
Thank you so much for sharing.
I then wanted to quickly talk about the Data Act. So Data Act was actually came into force in 2024, but I wrote it in 2025 because majority of the provision of the Data Act were applicable since September 2025. And basically the Data Act and sharing of data I think it's quite a restricted application. I think Digital Omnibus is more interesting, especially considering the question we just had. So the Digital Omnibus package, so it's super clear, it's not a regulation. It's the proposal that the European Commission made to simplify the implementation and the compliance with regulation, including the AI Act. And it's made several propositions, though 3 that you can see on the screen are just the one I chose to discuss with you, but there are more. The first one is the shift of the deadline for high-risk AI systems. So as I was saying, the AI Act is being implemented in waves. August of this year, for high-risk AI system. And considering there are no standard that is out to, because there are a lot of obligation in the AI Act, as I was saying, for high risk, but we are not yet published. So it is extremely hard for companies to be able to comply when they don't really know how they should comply. So the Commission is proposing to shift those deadlines to December of next year. Chances that this will be adopted, but please do not build your AI program around that may or may not move. It's a very risky move, so try to do the compliance that you can do before the deadline in August. We should know soon if this is going to be, if the package is going to be adopted, but I just want to mention it. The second thing I wanted to mention is using personal data. So if some of you are familiar with data protection, you know that every time you want to use personal data, you have to be compliant with the GDPR. And what the GDPR says you can only use personal data if you have reason to use the data and this reason, and you have to also have a legal basis. To make it super simple, basically with this new provision, they are trying to make the use of one of the legal bases in the GDPR easier. If you want to use personal data with this simplification from the Omnibus package, it should be easier for you to do that. This could be an opportunity to simplify the use of data for that purpose. And we know that a lot of big scalers are looking forward to this being adopted because I would say it's already done. Like a lot of them are already training models with personal data. So I guess this will just help them make sure that they're compliant now. Then the last one I wanted to discuss is the sensitive data for bias testing. So basically, this proposal is to allow to test bias with sensitive data, and this would only be for non-high-risk AI systems. Once again, this would be a great opportunity for organizations that know what sensitive data is, and they know where their sensitive data are. So I think this is also supposed to be read in line with all the other legislation that are applicable. So, and I think this is sometimes not done. So please be careful. It doesn't say you can do whatever you want. This is just meant at simplifying some of the obligation. And for me, what the omnibus is really showing that it's really trying to give more flexibility to organizations, to businesses. But you have to be aware that flexibility without governance is just a risk with fewer guardrails. So yeah, governance remains very, very relevant, even if the digital omnibus package is adopted. Okay, we have done the part that was the most the current challenge that I've seen most organizations are facing when it comes to AI governance. And here I would also really like if any of you has insight, because that is my view based on the interaction that I've had with a lot of people in other industries. And the first thing I want to say is that good questions do not always have, most of the time, they don't have easy answers. But I think this is the right place to start, is asking them. I've spent the last few years building AI governance framework, and one of the most obvious observation is that obviously the framework are maturing, the regulation, as I was saying, are being implemented, and we are still navigating questions that we don't have clean answers to. There are 3 of them that are shown now on the screen, and I imagine that some of you are familiar with them. One of the first questions I wanted to raise, and one of the first challenges, how do we enable autonomous agents without compromising effective governance? And that's a huge part. And before I can elaborate more on this one, I wanted to make a distinction between AI agents and agentic AI, because I understand those words are often used interchangeably, but they're not the same from a technical perspective. I had extensive discussion with my engineers about it, so I wanted to share some of the insight I have. Basically, an AI agent is any system that receives input and take action to fulfill a specific task. A chatbot could be considered an AI agent. But when we talk about agentic AI, what we mean is a system that operates with autonomy, pursue goals across multiple steps without requiring human approval at each decision point. And AI agents, they have been the talk for the past 2 years, especially the past year, because it promises to finally turn generative AI investments into real operational returns, and it is moving really fast. I have found a Deloitte report called State of AI in the Enterprise that reported that 74% of companies plan to deploy agentic AI within the 2 next years, but only 21% of them report having a mature model for governance of autonomous agents. And this 21% is a questionable number, in my opinion, because this is self-assessment. So what is for them a mature model for governance of autonomous agents? I think one example that might speak to some of you about this is OpenCloud. I guess most of you have heard about OpenCloud, the open source framework allowing its users to deploy autonomous agents. Became widely adopted earlier this year because it can execute a lot of tasks for you. Managing your email, organizing your file, executing commands, browsing the web on. And I don't know if you heard about this, but the director of alignment at Meta Superintelligence Lab, which is a person that is tasked to ensure AI is safe, gave an autonomous agent creating using OpenCloud access to her email. And explicitly, she instructed the agent to confirm before taking any action the agent bulk deleted hundreds of her emails. Why? Because agents have context compaction. It means compress its memory and lose critical instruction. After that, Meta decided to ban employees from using agent on company devices. Obviously, this example for me really reveals something very important, that we're still learning where are the boundaries of those systems. The agent didn't ignore the instruction maliciously. It lost them in a way not fully understood, even by the people who are building and studying these systems. Governing a technology whose failure mode are not still being discovered is very different. It's a very different challenge than governing a system you fully understand. In the energy sector, where we might deploy at some point autonomous agents, it has a lot of risk because it might touch operational system and supply chain processes. The governance challenge is not whether to deploy agents. It's whether the organization can move fast enough on the governance side to keep up with the deployment. If it can define action boundaries, if it can define accountability chains and oversight mechanism before your agent is live. I will go a bit deeper on the topic and give some practical advice on the next slide. I just want to raise the two next challenges that I see also in other organizations, which is how do we govern AI system we did not build, but instead procure for vendors? And this is, if your company is, and I guess most companies are now into AI adoption, depending on its strategy and its size, you are most probably going to use AI system that you didn't build internally, but you procured. And most frameworks assume that you have visibility to how the system works, what data was used to train the system, and how risks are assessed upstream. In practice, I can tell you, you don't have, because sometimes the vendor is not provided to you. And then you find yourself accountable for a system you did not design, you cannot fully audit, and you may not be able to modify. This is one of the most under-discussed challenges in enterprise AI governance from my experience. So my advice for this is to ask the question you would ask your engineers. I have myself had a lot of where I was asking questions and always have the answer, but you should try to ask the questions. And you have to work with your legal teams because you need to ensure that the contracts are requiring your vendor to notify you when they are enabling new AI components and assist with your assessment of those components. Make sure that they're clear and that you have clear liability clauses. And to have clear liability clauses, your legal team needs to understand the context of use. They need to have AI literacy. They need to understand what the technology is going to do. So there we can see again that AI is cross-functional. You can't just have one team that is taking care of the technical concerns and then the other team that are working on the side. Everybody has to work together. Last challenge I want to share with you is how do we keep AI risk assessment relevant when system and context evolve? That is a big chunk because with the EU AI Act and the risk classification, you have no choice but to assess your AI systems. And the problem is the risk is not static. You're deploying a system today for one use case, and maybe tomorrow it will be used for something else, or an employee will misuse the AI system you deployed. The question is not how you assess risk at deployment. For me, it's how you detect when assessments are no longer valid. From my experience, lots of them are still solving the first problem because it is a complex problem. The technology is moving fast, it's dynamic, and but the second question, how do you detect when an assessment is no longer valid, is where the real governance maturity gap sits. And if your risk assessment does not capture change, the governance framework is always governing yesterday's AI system. To address this issue, there is no secret. You have to have the cultural shift that we were discussing in the beginning. It means you have to train your employees. You have to make sure that they are aware how to use the system. I would say and I guess most companies have that today, but have an acceptable use for AI. train your employees to document when something changes in the risk assessment, and establish reassessment cadence automatically where you do your assessment. That would depend on the risk level of the AI system. Those three questions are very relevant, but as I said, I wanted to focus a little bit on the first one because I understand it's one that is very relevant for a lot of organizations today. And so, yeah, autonomous agents, big topic. And as I mentioned already, autonomous agents just don't recommend, they act. And most governance frameworks are not ready for this. Agents are now being deployed to act autonomously. They are now being deployed to act autonomously, sorry. They are routing, approving, procuring, optimizing, and that's without having a human always in the loop. In the energy sector, this could materialize in decisions that could affect infrastructure, define the boundary within which your agent is allowed to act. It answers the question that a policy, a risk framework, a regulator might ask you, who authorized the decision? On what basis? Could a human have intervened? Can you prove it? As mentioned, data governance is a critical input to this because without it, we cannot govern an AI system responsibly. How can we vouch for the data it acts on if we don't have good data governance? And I thought I wanted to show you across 4 different dimensions where data governance and AI governance begins. Because as I said, they're not the same thing, but without one, the other one efficiency is limited. So to begin with, let's start with the access and security. Most organizations, they have detailed access control policy for data, but they don't have any equivalent for agent actions. What can the agent do? Can it execute a transaction autonomously? If so, at what is the threshold of the transaction? The decision needs to be defined, documented, and reviewed. We cannot inherit any model default behavior. We have to adapt it to the organization and its risk appetite. From a data governance point of view, obviously you need access controls on data the agent can access. From an AI governance point of view, you need an action boundary policy. These two need to be defined closely for the use case to work. And you have to do that with a team who will be using and benefiting from the agent, not isolated in your own governance team. The second thing I want to discuss is data quality, huge topic in data governance. Data governance is a risk input, not just a data management problem. When you deploy an AI agent, your governance framework needs to define the acceptable level of data quality for autonomous action when the agent has to escalate to a human rather than proceeding. From a data governance perspective, you of course need data quality control, which define quality and measure it. Data governance will tell you the data quality score is 79%. When, from an AI governance perspective, you need a policy before any deployment to define the threshold at which poor quality triggers human oversight. So you need to define when agent can act autonomously, but also what happens when the threshold is not met. Be explicit, because otherwise the agent might proceed anyway. So AI governance will say below 90%, this agent does not proceed without human review. Both have to work together again, because if AI governance sets a threshold, but data governance isn't measuring, then the threshold is meaningless. Then we have lineage and traceability. Traceability needs to be built in agent architecture from day one, not just for high-risk AI system, because yeah, under the AI Act, you have to have the logs, as I was saying, for high-risk AI system. But when it comes to agent, you should have traceability for all agents, as it helps going back and understanding what went wrong when things went wrong. As we saw with the OpenClaw example, for example, we saw that deletion of email happened. Without traceability, it is very hard to understand why the agent made that decision. So data governance will provide the data lineage layer, what data set was used, what was the version of the data set, the timestamp. AI governance requires the logic, the decision logic, the confidence level, the action taken, the human oversight mechanism that was available. And finally, human oversight and explainability. Oversight only works if a human can understand what the agent is doing and why. Data governance will tell you, make the data interpretable to a human, what the data represent, where it comes from, if there is any known bias. And then the question is, can a human reviewer trust and understand the data the agent is using? AI governance make the decision interpretable and the intervention possible. It must define the decision the agent can make alone, the ones requiring a human check, and how a human intervenes when something looks wrong. This is the heart of AI governance, especially for autonomous systems. So I'm going to try to go super quickly. I'm sorry, I have to get time now and it's going super fast. I wanted to do so much content and now I'm realizing I might have been a bit too over optimistic.
No, it's super interesting.
So I wanted to give you practical insight on how to govern agents in an organization, because I feel like this is a question most governance framework haven't answered yet. And the absence of answer is a governance gap, in my opinion. So when an autonomous agent acts on behalf of your organization, so it triggers an alert, it approves a transaction, it is functioning as an actor of your organization. So do you have identity and access right for agents? As mentioned before, agents need access to systems, data, sometimes external services to do their work. Most organizations manage this informally. The agent inherits the permission of the person who deployed it or get broad access because it is easier. That's what business says all the time. But this is not governance. An agent should have defined identity, scoped access rights, and an audit trail of what is accessed when, like a human employee would. The question of whether agents are treated like employees with access rights or like system with service accounts is not just a technical question. It's a governance decision that determines accountability. And for this, you need to have conversation with your IT and your HR. Who is accountable when an agent acts? This is where there are legal and operational complexities. When an autonomous agent makes a decision that causes harm, who is responsible? The person who deployed it, the vendor who built it, the person who is using it. Most organizations have not mapped agent action to human accountability chains. That mapping needs to exist before deployment, not after something goes wrong. And finally, inventory. As I was saying at the beginning, we're discussing risk classification and inventory. Should your agent be registered in your AI repository or inventory? Well, I would say yes, because every autonomous agent is operating in your environment may have significant business impacts, which is why registration and review matters, regardless of regulatory threat. Of course, if the AI Act, if the agent is deployed in a high-risk area, anyway, you have to do it. But I think aside regulatory consideration, you should register your agents. The biggest challenge is that agents are often deployed very fast, sometimes, most of the time, by individual teams, sometimes without central oversight, which brings us back to the issue of shadow AI I mentioned before. If you do not know what agents are running in your organization, you cannot govern them. Agents are not tools, they are actors. And as such, they need defined roles, boundaries, and accountability chain, because they are unforgiving of governance gaps. Every role or boundary you do not define in advance, the agent will define for you, and most probably not in the way you intended. So very quickly, I wanted to give you three key takeaways. The first one is scaling AI and scaling AI responsibly are not the same thing. Organizations are deploying AI faster than they are governing it. It shows up in incident, regulatory exposure, eroded trust with customers. Governance is not a break on innovation. It is what makes it sustainable, and it is what builds trust in your organization, but also with your customers. AI governance and data governance are interdependent, but they are not the same discipline. As I was saying, when it comes to AI system, using AI, data governance gives you the foundation: quality, lineage, access control, security. AI governance gives you the boundary: who decide, who is accountable, how humans intervene. You cannot do one without the other, but confusing them leaves critical gaps, as we have seen with autonomous agents. 3, encourage your organization to treat governance as a continuous practice. Technology will keep evolving faster than any framework can fully capture. What matters is not having all the answer, is asking the right questions, as I was saying. Building governance is like a muscle. You have to stay honest and you have to know what you do not know yet. Because ultimately, AI governance is not just a technology problem, it's a people and accountability problem. The framework, the regulation, the standard, they should be embedded technically as much as possible, but they all require people to live them. Because good governance is not a perfect framework, as mentioned. It's an organization where everyone feels responsible for it, not just one team. Nobody has all the answers yet. The organization doing this well are not the one with perfect framework. They are the one with the courage to ask hard questions and the curiosity to look for answers. And that's why I would love to hear your perspective and how you're doing AI governance in your organization. And I'm happy to continue the conversation here or on LinkedIn or however you want, but here are my details. And thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Hannah. If you are okay to stay a couple of more minutes.
Sure, yeah.
There is a few questions on the chat that I think are quite relevant, and we'll love to have your views. And if you have more questions, please let us know. But I will start with one from Marvin when he's saying around the classic data quality dimensions. He's saying, do you feel that those dimensions are enough when now comes to governing agentic AI pipelines, or do we need to define a new type of dimensions on how we look at data quality? And I'm thinking we were looking traditionally at how fresh is the data, how complete is the data, are the data types correctly? Do you know what I mean? But is that enough, or from your experience you are seeing there's other dimensions that should be considered in this new world?
From my experience, I think if this is done well, this is already great, because I've seen very, not in my organization, but I've seen a lot of organizations struggling with data quality even before we started talking about autonomous agents. I don't know if we will need a new way of defining data quality. This is actually a good question, and that's something I can't answer today. But I think if we can already do data quality well as we know it today, it will be still improvement from what I've seen so far. So I guess we will see this together.
No, that's a good point. I agree. If we have the foundational right, it's already a step towards the right direction. There was another question, Hannah, in relation to the ISO certification that you mentioned. The question is the certification given obtained to the enterprise company level, or is it to the professional personal level? And then are you seeing the certification gaining popularity? Elaborate on the benefits of it as well.
Yeah, so you have the certification. ISO standards are always for organization, but as an individual, you can be certified to implement the certification for your organization. So I personally do have this lead implementer certification for ISO 42001, but you can be auditor. I think there is something else. You have different levels. I think it's funny because more and more I see customers asking, are you ISO 42001 certified? And I know that it is becoming a real competitive advantage as an organization who is selling AI system or product that embed AI system to have the certification. So I would say if you can go for it, if your organization can go for it, it's better because it shows that you have embedded certain practices, especially when it comes to ethical practices, which is becoming also very important. I would say go for it, but it's a lot of work. You have to know, you have to put in place a lot of frameworks. You have to make sure that you have impact assessment in place, that all of your AI solutions are going through those impact assessment. So it's work, but if you already have ISO certification 27001, which is the case of big organization, so it's an IT certification, you can already build on what you have, and it won't be so difficult or burdensome to go after the 42001. But I'm happy to also discuss this further if needed.
Awesome. Thank you so much. There's two more questions. I will try just to go through those because to be respectful of everyone that join us at lunchtime.
I'm sorry.
No. It's always, this is good. It's like we are testing. DAMA is new, so we are testing all these things. What is the best slot as well? But one question from Pedro was, should regulations force providers and developers to ensure that all AI-driven action must be logged with sufficient detail. So he gave the example of end-to-end data. What you were speaking about, AI governance and data governance of linking together. In a sense, there was an outcome. What was the action that drive that outcome? What was the decision made? What was the model used? And then the data that back up in terms of the context. So just an opinion on that.
Can you just repeat the beginning of the question, because I got lost after the end?
If you feel that regulation should force this
Yes.
to be logged all the time.
Yeah, I feel like regulation is going to do very little for you today, because they're only asking this for high-risk AI system. So I don't know if this is a plan for the future, but as an organization, if you want your innovation to be sustainable and your customer to trust you and to be able to fix also problems, having those logs is imperative. Like there is no way around it, because people are asking more and more. Can we check the action that were taken? Can we see? Obviously, we're not asking it to make it explainable for every user, but it is imperative if you want to improve also your AI solution that you have those logs available. Yeah, I think, but regulation, I don't know if we can trust regulation to dig into this point in particular. I think organizations should also try to be more responsible, because they will benefit from it and ultimately.
Awesome. This is cool. I think I was checking, I think I went through most of or all, I hope, all the different questions. Hannah, I want to just really thank you. I learned a bunch through what you share with us. And Elena, thank you and Alex for your feedback on the chat. They said it was really insightful session. For everyone, we will have more of these events. We are just starting. It's pinned on the chat. If you want to stay connected, follow us on LinkedIn. Also, you can become a member of DAMA, where we have some exclusive events, and just share the word. If you found these sessions useful, just share with your peers. And as Hannah said, let's not stop the conversation here. If there is more, use LinkedIn for contacts and messages, and we would love to bring more topics that are useful for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.